Viking magic. How the North turned everyday life into a cosmic obstacle course. The Vikings. Just the word evokes images of bearded, axe-wielding adventurers screaming, Valhalla, at the top of their lungs while sailing through a storm, right? But beneath the hair, muscles, and general enthusiasm for violence, Vikings were paranoid little metaphysical nerds. Their entire worldview, from sunrise to sunset, revolved around a single, unshakable principle. The universe is alive. It's watching you, and if you screw up, you die. Probably in a completely preventable way. To live in Viking Scandinavia was to assume that the entire cosmos was a slightly irritated software program in which you were the beta tester. Birds weren't birds, they were divine notifications. Clouds weren't clouds, they were mood indicators. Every dream, sneeze, cough, and poorly tied shoelace had the potential to drastically alter your life. If a Viking stubbed his toe, that wasn't clumsiness. That was a warning. If he dropped his knife, that wasn't accident. It was probably Loki sending subtle critiques about his life choices. Every moment was meaningful, and failing to interpret those meanings correctly could lead to misfortune, or worse, a very literal, avoidable death. The universe is not neutral. Vikings did not believe in coincidences. If you think your Wi-Fi is spotty, that's just bad reception. If a Viking's spear snapped mid-raid, that was a sign from Odin that you had angered the Norns or misaligned your Hammingja. The world itself was alive, reactive, and deeply judgmental. Gravity, apparently, was not an inanimate force but a morally active principle, ready to punish foolishness. Everything in nature, animals, rocks, water, fire, was part of an interconnected magical system. This system could be influenced by human action, words, and ritual. That is to say, the Vikings believed in cause and effect on steroids, where cause could be a sneeze and effect could be a ruined voyage or lost livestock. This magical worldview wasn't fringe. It wasn't some optional hobby. It was basic life skill training. Forget fishing, farming, or raiding. Understanding the hidden forces of the world was the difference between prosperity and starvation. When a Viking woke up, he didn't just check the weather. He scanned the heavens, observed the behavior of animals, consulted dream interpretations, and might even whisper apologies to spirits inhabiting the household hearth before even leaving bed. And yes, failure to do these things correctly could, and often did, result in misfortune. The distributed soul system. One key element of this magical worldview is the Viking understanding of the soul. Unlike the modern Christian concept of a singular soul, the Viking soul was a complex network of interacting components. The hugr represented the mind and thought patterns. The fylgja was an external manifestation, often taking the form of an animal guardian that could appear in dreams or accompany you in the physical world. The hammer allowed shape-shifting or temporary changes in form. The Hammingja represented inherited family luck that could be accumulated, lost, or stolen. Some sources even describe a person's life force as being partially tied to ancestral or environmental spirits. In short, a Viking wasn't a unitary being. He was a multi-layered spiritual ecosystem. And ecosystems need maintenance. This is why everyday magic was considered essential, not optional. A Viking might spend hours performing rituals, carving runes, or leaving offerings just to maintain equilibrium in his personal system. Failing to do so was literally considered dangerous. Omens, signs, and the art of cosmic reading. In this universe, dreams and signs weren't vague or symbolic, they were operational data streams. A dream of falling teeth wasn't subconscious anxiety, it was a specific prediction of death or misfortune. A fox crossing your path wasn't coincidence, it was a messenger with a message about your next action. Ravens were particularly significant because they were associated with Odin and often considered divine scouts or spies. Observing a raven's flight direction, timing, and behavior was akin to checking stock market reports today, except if you misread the data, the penalty was potentially fatal. The Vikings had incredibly detailed rules about interpreting these signs. For example, the same bird could mean prosperity if it flew east and doom if it flew west. The time of day, the phase of the moon, and even the direction you were facing could change the meaning entirely. Ignoring or misinterpreting signs was tantamount to inviting disaster. This obsessive attention to cosmic detail made everyday life incredibly stressful or incredibly absurd, depending on your perspective. Everyday magical objects, of course, the Vikings didn't just passively interpret signs, they actively tried to manipulate them. Their toolkit included a dazzling array of objects, charms, and symbols, all imbued with magical significance. Amulets and pendants. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, pendants were everywhere. Everyone wore one. Not necessarily out of religious devotion, but as a portable antivirus against cosmic misfortune. These pendants weren't jewelry. They were wearable insurance policies against angry gods, spirits, and, occasionally, angry neighbors. Runes. Runes were more than an alphabet. They were portable spells, each character a condensed packet of magical influence. Carving runes onto a sword, comb, or ship wasn't decorative, it was activating a software module in the universe, instructing fate to behave favorably. Vikings carved runes on practically everything. Doorposts to ward off spirits, spear shafts for strength in battle, bowls for successful meals, and even bones to carry personal protection. Household charms. The Vikings also left offerings for household spirits, landvader, and minor deities. Ale or small food offerings, hidden carvings, and carefully tied knots in clothing were all designed to maintain cosmic favor. The household itself was seen as a microcosm of the universe. Neglecting its magical upkeep was a surefire way to invite trouble. Everyday rituals. Even mundane actions, like tying a knot in a rope or preparing food in a certain way, could have magical significance. Speak the wrong word while boarding a ship, and the sea might interpret it as disrespect. Mishandle a farm tool, and the spirits might sabotage your crops. Everything was both physical and spiritual simultaneously, and actions carried consequences on multiple layers. Social implications of magic. Because magic permeated every aspect of life, Vikings developed social protocols around it. Professionals like seers, rune carvers, and sorcerers were respected and often feared. A single misinterpreted dream could result in consulting one of these experts, and failure to heed their advice could escalate into literal disaster. But it wasn't just formal magic that mattered. Every household member participated in maintaining spiritual equilibrium, from children leaving offerings to farmers whispering apologies to nature before planting. Magic was also inherently defensive. Curses, charms, and rituals served as protective measures against both human and supernatural threats. Enemies might attempt to influence your fate, so counter charms and talismans became commonplace. The line between everyday practicality and magical practice was almost non-existent. To a Viking, not performing magic was reckless. It was leaving your life unprotected in a world where fate was manipulable and unforgiving. By now, it should be obvious. Viking magic wasn't whimsical, it was a survival system. Their world was a web of spirits, omens, and consequences. Every action, word, and dream had meaning, and ignoring them was literally dangerous. Magic wasn't entertainment, it was everyday life insurance. So next time you picture a Viking, stop imagining a hulking figure screaming for Valhalla, and instead imagine a nervous cosmic analyst, furrowed brow, consulting birds, dreams, and carved sticks, meticulously trying to prevent fate from punching him in the face. The tools, rituals, and charms Vikings carried weren't optional. They were as essential as shoes, knives, and mead. And that, dear listener, is why everyday life in Viking Scandinavia was simultaneously fascinating, terrifying, and deeply ridiculous. Runes, spells, and seiðr. The Viking Guide to Magical Overkill. By this point, we know that Vikings lived in a world where reality itself had moods, the universe monitored your every action, and even sneezing at the wrong time could be fatal. So naturally, they didn't just hope for the best. Oh no, Vikings took magic very seriously. And when I say seriously, I mean they treated runes, spells, and seiðr like you or I treat Wi-Fi, coffee, and existential dread. Absolutely essential for surviving the day. This chapter is your front row seat to Viking magical overengineering. We're talking about tools, techniques, and practices so specific, so intricate, that they make today's wellness rituals look like a toddler's craft project. Runes. More than letters. First off, runes weren't an alphabet. Sure, they could technically be used to write things down, but to a Viking, that was the least interesting part. Runes were living symbols, each infused with cosmic power. Think of them as ancient coding languages. Carve them incorrectly, and your program could crash. Carve them correctly, and suddenly your spear strikes with godlike accuracy, or your farm animals stay productive and slightly less murderous. Runes were carved on just about everything: swords, boats, doorframes, amulets, combs, even pieces of bone. Why? Because everything could be upgraded with magical code. A sword wasn't just a sword. It was a magical performance-enhanced sword if you carved the right runes into it. Want your boat to sail faster or avoid storms? Runes. Want your livestock to be fertile? Runes. Want revenge on the guy who insulted your beard last week? You guessed it, runes. Here's the kicker. Each rune carried multiple layers of meaning. The Fehu rune, for example, symbolized wealth, but also fertility, mobility, and cosmic favor. Carve it wrong, and suddenly your wealth is a curse, your crops die, or Loki decides your neighbor's goose is legally allowed to murder you. Everyday spells. Because why not? Viking spells weren't about summoning dragons or turning invisible. Most were ridiculously practical. These were magic hacks for day-to-day survival. Travel spells. Before sailing, a Viking might whisper a chant to calm the sea or appease the wind spirits. Forget it, and you were at the mercy of weather literally dictated by invisible deities. Storm hits? Your own incompetence is to blame. Love spells. Yes, Vikings had them. Because apparently, nothing is more terrifying than unrequited affection during the harsh northern winter. A simple charm or whispered incantation could, theoretically, make someone notice your beard or admire your axe skills. Animal management spells. Want your livestock to produce more milk? Or your hunting dogs to be less murderous toward neighbors? There were charms and rituals for that. Some involved tying knots in a specific pattern and whispering to the animal at dawn. The striking thing is how mundane these spells were. It's not, summon a demon to devour your enemies. It's, tie knots in your cow's stall and say this exact phrase at sunrise or she won't produce milk. And yet, for Vikings, Failing to do these small rituals could have very real consequences. Seiðr. The forbidden shamanism enters seiðr, the more dramatic cousin of runes and charms. This is the magic most associated with Viking witchcraft, and also the one men were terrified to be caught practicing. Why? Because seiðr was seen as crossing natural gender boundaries. Male practitioners risked social shame or accusations of cowardice. But the magic itself? Extremely powerful and versatile. Seiðr could be used for predicting the future, influencing enemy actions, controlling minds, to some extent, altering the weather. Curse delivery practitioners often sat in quiet, meditative trances, chanting and weaving symbolic motions to manipulate invisible forces. It sounds dramatic because it was. And Vikings were equally dramatic in their fear. If a man was caught performing seiðr, it wasn't just bad luck, it was socially fatal. Women, on the other hand, could practice seiðr with less stigma, which created a fascinating dynamic. The most feared magical practitioners were often women, quietly influencing the fates of entire households or even raiding parties, while men grumbled about propriety and manliness. The art of curse delivery. Yes, Vikings cursed each other. They also cursed livestock, tools, neighbors, rival clans, and, occasionally, their own reflection. This wasn't about mean jokes. Curses were considered functional tools in the same way we consider insurance policies or seatbelts, prevent harm or enforce justice. Some common curse techniques: carved objects. Stick a rune inscribed stick into a target's property. Congratulations. Subtle misfortune guaranteed. Verbal curses. Spoken at precisely the wrong time in ritual space, words could physically affect an opponent. Symbolic acts. Breaking an object representing someone else, or binding their clothing in a knot while chanting, was a magical attack. It's the kind of thing you read and think, wow, that's extremely extra, but the Vikings read it and thought, necessary. Magical hygiene. Believe it or not, Vikings' obsession with magic extended to personal grooming. Yes, grooming. Combs, hair braiding, and even beard care were considered partly magical practices. Why? Hair could carry spiritual energy, and a carefully groomed braid could protect you from curses or evil spirits. Imagine a Viking waking up in the morning, combing his hair meticulously while whispering protective charms, then heading off to battle, armed with both his axe and a hedge against the supernatural. This is not exaggeration. Archaeologists have found combs with runes inscribed on them. Vikings weren't just stylish, they were magically stylish. Protecting the household, the home, was a microcosm of the universe, and maintaining it required constant magical vigilance. Offerings to Landvader, local spirits, were common. Simple things, like pouring ale into a saucer at the corner of the house, could keep spirits from sabotaging crops, livestock, or children. Failing to respect these invisible landlords? Bad luck. Crop failure. Sick animals. Disease. Even doors were magical. Doorposts were sometimes carved with runes to ward off unwanted spiritual visitors. Knots in rope, arrangements of objects, and the positioning of furniture were all subtly magical interventions to keep the cosmic balance intact. Why it all looks ridiculous today, modern readers often laugh at these practices. A charm for a cow's milk production? A protective rune on a comb? Yes, from our rational, science-driven perspective, it's absurd. But for the Vikings, absurdity was a luxury they could not afford. They lived in a hostile environment where misfortune was constant, and magical interventions were the only way to feel like they had some control. It's like a high-stakes video game where everything is rigged against you, and every minor action must be optimized to prevent catastrophe. That's daily life in Viking Scandinavia, minus the Wi-Fi and plus a lot more invisible angry spirits. Magic wasn't optional. It wasn't quirky. It was life insurance. And if you weren't constantly thinking about it, you didn't just risk embarrassment, you risked literal disaster. Bizarre rituals, shape-shifting, and the totally practical Viking magic of chaos. By now, you should understand that Viking life wasn't exactly casual. You didn't just wake up, comb your hair, grab your spear, and hope the day treated you nicely. No, every step, sneeze, glance, and breakfast morsel had magical significance. But what really separates the average magical fiddling from full-blown Viking wizardry? That's where we enter the world of rituals so elaborate and absurd that you start questioning which was scarier, the North Sea, or the people who lived next to it. This chapter covers rituals, shape-shifting beliefs, and magical combat, the Viking approach to metaphysics that makes us modern humans look like toddlers who got a book of spells for Christmas and immediately forgot to read the instructions. Shape-shifting. Not just for werewolves, Vikings didn't just believe in ordinary magic. They believed some people could literally change shape, either temporarily or semi-permanently. This wasn't cosplay. This wasn't role-playing. This was serious metaphysical hacking. The term hammer refers to the part of the soul responsible for physical transformation. A practitioner could take the hammer of an animal, often a wolf, bear, or bird, for short periods, gaining its abilities. You wanted to fight like a bear? Take the bear hammer. Need to spy unnoticed? Bird hammer. This wasn't considered supernatural nonsense, it was an understood part of the magical ecosystem. Successful shape-shifting required preparation, ritual chants, sometimes fasting, offerings, and correct alignment with cosmic energies. Misfire? You could find yourself partially transformed, permanently confused, or socially ostracized for looking like an insane person who smells faintly like a fox. Yes. The stakes were real. Berserkers. Living spell templates. Berserkers, the legendary warriors who went into battle like screaming demonic whirlwind axes, weren't just madmen on adrenaline. They were magical practitioners of combat trance, an induced state that supposedly imbued them with the strength, ferocity, and invulnerability of animals. Historians speculate this may have involved psychological techniques, herbs, and ritual preparation. But the Vikings themselves? They called it war magic, a direct channeling of spiritual forces into the human body. A successful berserker was basically a walking, screaming magical experiment. Oddly, this state could also serve as a curse for the unwary. A poorly prepared warrior attempting to mimic berserker techniques could collapse mid-battle, suffer psychological trauma, or find himself accidentally attacking allies. Magic wasn't glamorous, it was extremely dangerous if mishandled. Rituals for everything. Vikings didn't just ritualize battles, they ritualized daily life, livestock management, and interpersonal disputes. Weather rituals. Long before Noah, Vikings tried to control the elements. Farmers would whisper to trees, sprinkle water in specific patterns, or use charms to appease gods controlling rain and wind. Sailors performed elaborate chants and symbol placements before voyages. Misstep, and your longship might meet a literal watery doom. Love rituals. Want your crush to notice your axe? Vikings had spells for that, often involving herbs, charms, and very awkward public performances designed to draw attention. Fertility rituals. These were everywhere, often blending magic with mundane agricultural practices. Crops and livestock could be activated by charms, knots, and chants. And no, these weren't optional. A failed ritual might mean less milk, fewer eggs, or a general cosmic frown. Curse rituals. If someone wronged you, you could bind their fate. Techniques included tying objects together, whispering their name at specific times, or carving runes into stones or sticks and leaving them where the target would find them. Seiðr in practice. Remember seiðr from part 2? Here it escalates. Seiðr was, in practice, high-level magical management. Women and men skilled in seiðr could predict future events accurately enough to influence raids or migrations, affect enemy decisions or misfortune, communicate with spirits for advice or intervention. Seiðr often involved trance-like states, chants, symbolic hand movements, and ritual paraphernalia. Practitioners were part wizard, part therapist, part hacker of the universe. Men were often discouraged from practicing seiðr, as doing so was considered unmanly. Yet, ironically, the most feared magical practitioners were often women. They quietly manipulated social, familial, and battle outcomes while men grunted about propriety. Magical combat. Spells on the battlefield. Vikings didn't just prepare spiritually, they prepared magically for war. Before engagements, warriors might carve runes into weapons or armor for luck and strength, perform chants for courage or protection, invoke animal hammer to enhance their fighting capabilities, engage in ritual feasting or fasting to align spiritually. Even enemies could be cursed from afar. This was magical pre-battle preparation, akin to modern sports teams performing rituals, but far more lethal if done incorrectly. Everyday magical life. Not all Viking magic was epic. Most of it was mundane, absurd, and completely intertwined with daily life. Hair combing and braiding were magical protections. Knots tied in ropes or clothing could control fate. Placement of household items and offerings to land spirits were routine. Dreams were interpreted to guide farm work, raids, and social interactions. Magic was essentially like brushing your teeth. Do it right, and things go well. Mess it up, and disaster follows. The difference is, instead of cavities, you might lose a ship or your entire crop yield. Why this looks ridiculous to modern eyes. From a modern standpoint, Viking magic seems elaborate, arbitrary, and absurd. A charm to protect your goat, a spell to influence the wind, an animal-shaped soul. These sound insane. But to Vikings, it was all logical, necessary, and effective. Life was short, harsh, and unpredictable. Magic was survival, intertwined with morality, psychology, and social expectation. In essence, magic was life. It wasn't optional. It wasn't for show. And failing at it? Well, that could end your day very badly, or at least give you a hell of a story. Curses, charms, and the absurd business of Viking magic. If you thought Viking magic was all about personal protection, war spells, and animal-shaped soul hacking, congratulations, you're only halfway through the chaos. Vikings didn't just practice magic, they built a mini-economy around it, complete with trade, professional practitioners, and a thriving market for charms, talismans, and curses. Imagine Etsy in the 9th century, except everything is deadly serious and a single bad review could result in misfortune or murder. The magical marketplace. Vikings traded everything: timber, furs, amber, swords, slaves, fish, and magic. Yes, magic. Skilled rune carvers, seiðr practitioners, and charm makers were part of the economic ecosystem. They weren't just eccentric nerds, They were specialists in cosmic risk management, and people paid handsomely for their services. Want a talisman that ensures your crops survive a frost? There's a rune carver for that. Want a charm to protect your livestock from curses, disease, or bad weather? Hire a seiðr practitioner. Need revenge on that neighbor who insulted your mead quality last week? There's a bespoke curse for sale. Prices vary depending on skill, reputation, and potential cosmic impact. Some wealthy Vikings accumulated entire, magical portfolios of charms, runes, and spells, much like we collect insurance policies, stocks, or NFTs, but far, far more terrifying. Charms and talismans. Charms were everywhere. They were the Viking Swiss Army knives of magic, portable, versatile, and slightly terrifying if misused. Common types included protective charms, Thor hammers, rune-inscribed pendants, and amulets made to ward off disease, evil spirits, or angry gods. Fertility charms, used for crops, livestock, or even personal relationships. Luck charms, runic inscriptions on weapons, clothing, or household objects to improve fortune in business, battle, or gambling. Cursed objects, crafted to bring misfortune to enemies. Could be as simple as a carved stick left on someone's property or as elaborate as a series of intertwined knots with spoken incantations. Some of these charms were mass-produced in a sense. Rune carvers would carve multiples of the same protective symbols on small objects for everyday buyers. Others were bespoke, tailored for specific clients and carefully calibrated to produce a predictable magical effect. Curses as a social tool. Curses weren't just personal vendettas, they were part of Viking social enforcement. The average Viking community was small, tight-knit, and brutally honest. If you wronged someone, a professional curse might be the socially appropriate response, like a legal warning but with a higher chance of personal injury. Techniques included rune-inscribed sticks, placed strategically on the victim's property. Verbal curses, spoken at key times with the correct ritual alignment. Symbolic destruction, breaking an object representing the victim while chanting their name. Curses were serious business. Failing to properly enforce social norms with magic could lead to escalations in disputes, sometimes resulting in feuds, raids, or literal combat. In other words, magic was law enforcement with flair. Everyday superstitions. Not all Viking magic was overtly professional. Much of it was embedded in the mundane, absurd details of daily life. Hair and beard magic, combs, braids, and grooming rituals were considered protective. A poorly groomed beard could invite curses. Knots and placement. Knots tied in clothing or ropes, arrangements of objects in the home, and even offerings to household spirits maintained cosmic equilibrium. Dream interpretations. Dreams were considered highly operational, guiding everyday decisions about crops, travel, and social interactions. Animals as messengers. Ravens, foxes, and other creatures were monitored for signs of luck or misfortune. Imagine waking up, brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, whispering to the spirits, observing a raven, and checking your dreams, all before breakfast. That was daily life in Viking Scandinavia. Modern humans complain about commuting and taxes. Vikings worried about cosmic approval and ancestral wrath. Magical trades and services. Viking magic wasn't just personal, it was commercial. Specialists offered services for a fee. Rune carving, for weapons, doors, or personal items. Seiðr consulting, trance-based divination for family, war, or commerce. Charm creation, protective talismans, fertility charms, or curses. Clients ranged from ordinary farmers to wealthy chieftains. Successful magical practitioners commanded respect and money, sometimes acquiring significant social power. Their work blurred the line between religion, law, and business. A well-placed curse or charm could alter trade deals, rating outcomes, or even marriage negotiations. Why modern humans laugh from today's perspective, this might seem absurd. Charging for charms? Leaving offerings to spirits? Speaking to animals as divine messengers? Yes, it's funny, but only if you ignore the stakes. Vikings lived in a world where misfortune could kill you quickly. Magic wasn't optional. It was practical. It was also everywhere. Personal, domestic, social, economic, and martial spheres all incorporated magic. You couldn't escape it. Even social status and reputation were entangled in magical competence. A person with weak charms or poorly carved runes was socially vulnerable. Conversely, a skilled practitioner could wield considerable influence. Magical tools as daily necessities. Many tools doubled as magical implements. Swords, inscribed with runes for victory or protection. Ships, runic carvings to protect crews and cargo. Household items, combs, bowls, and knives sometimes had protective inscriptions. Knots and ropes, arranged for luck, protection, or curse defense. The key takeaway: for a Viking, magic was a practical, pervasive, and unavoidable part of life, not just a fun ritual. It was risk management, social currency, and cosmic insurance rolled into one. Magic was everywhere. It governed success in raids, fertility in livestock, domestic peace, and personal safety. The Vikings' obsession with rituals, charms, runes, and curses may seem ridiculous today, but it was an entirely logical response to a dangerous, unpredictable world. They lived in the north, where winter starvation, storms, raids, and disease were constant threats. Magic was a toolkit to manage these dangers. It also made life weirdly entertaining, if you enjoy imagining grown adults negotiating cosmic bureaucracy while tying knots in cow stalls or whispering apologies to ravens. In short, Vikings didn't just believe in magic, they lived it, traded it, fought with it, and occasionally cursed their neighbors over it. And all of this absurd, chaotic practice was completely normalized. The absurdities, mishaps, and magical misfires of Viking life. By now, you should be thoroughly convinced that Viking life was a non-stop negotiation with cosmic forces, spirits, and the occasional overly ambitious raven. But if you think all of this magic, runes, curses, and shape-shifting was orderly, think again. Part 5 is here to remind you that Vikings were ridiculously creative, occasionally terrifying, and often their own worst magical enemies. This chapter dives into the truly absurd, the spectacularly over-engineered, and the "did that actually work?" moments of Viking magical culture. When spells go wrong, magic wasn't always effective. Sometimes it backfired spectacularly, because magic in Viking belief was a force multiplier of reality, not a guaranteed fix. A poorly carved rune could reverse its intended effect. A protective charm might invite misfortune. Incorrectly timed incantations could anger spirits instead of appeasing them. Misreading omens could lead a raid straight into a storm or enemy ambush. Imagine waking up, performing your daily protective rituals, only to accidentally curse your own livestock because you tied the wrong knot at the wrong time. That's a typical Tuesday in Viking Scandinavia. Mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they could be financially, socially, or spiritually fatal. Absurd superstitions. Viking superstition extended into areas that seem laughably minor today. Consider sneezing. A sneeze could signal an impending attack from spirits, or just be a sneeze, but Vikings couldn't afford to find out by chance. Step over thresholds carefully. Doing so incorrectly might bring doom upon your family. Touching certain animals. Some were considered harbingers of good luck, others omens of death. Verbal precision. Saying the wrong word at the wrong time, especially at sea, could literally summon a storm. The modern human reading this laughs. And yet, for Vikings, every tiny action was weighted with potential consequences. Misfortune was everywhere, and magic was the toolkit for navigating it. Ridiculous magical objects. The Viking obsession with objects is worth emphasizing. They weren't just sentimental or decorative, they were functional magical interfaces. Rune-inscribed combs. Not just for hair. Protective. Amulets and pendants. Everyday life insurance. Carved sticks, bones, and stones. Weapons, protective charms, or curse tools. Knots in ropes and cords. Everyday magical coding. Even mundane objects could carry spiritual payloads. Drop a rune-inscribed comb. Potential cosmic upset. Forget to leave ale for the household spirits? Karma might not just bite, it could stomp your crops flat. Bizarre rituals. Rituals could be highly specific and frequently bizarre. A few examples. Fertility rituals for livestock. Sometimes involving gestures, chants, knots, and occasionally peculiar timing tied to moon phases. Pre-raid weather rituals. Chanting, offerings, and symbolic placements on the boat to influence the wind. Love and relationship rituals. Whispers, herbs, and ritualized displays to activate affection. Some rituals seem absurdly petty. Whispering to chickens before they laid eggs, or leaving mead in the corner for invisible household spirits. But for Vikings, these practices weren't absurd, they were practical and socially reinforced. Magical warfare. Viking warfare was part physical, part magical. Before raids, weapons were inscribed with runes for strength and protection. Spells and curses targeted enemies from afar. Berserkers entered trance states for combat ferocity. Seiðr practitioners tried to subtly influence outcomes via prophecy and manipulation. Every battle was a mix of strategy, brute force, and metaphysical overengineering. A single miscast spell could turn the tide against you, or accidentally annihilate your own allies. When magic became a lifestyle to a Viking, magic wasn't a hobby, it was life itself. Hair grooming, cooking, walking through the village, even drinking mead involved layers of magical concern. The line between ordinary and ritual was non-existent. A farmer tying a knot in a rope wasn't eccentric. A ship captain whispering to the wind wasn't paranoid. A mother arranging her home and offerings wasn't neurotic. They were following the logical extension of their worldview. The universe was alive, the spirits were real, and reality reacted to human behavior. Magic was a toolkit, insurance policy, and moral system rolled into one. Most absurd beliefs. Vikings truly excelled at absurdity in magical thinking. Animal familiars. Some humans believed their fylgja, animal spirit, could act independently, warn of danger, or even punish enemies. Shape-shifting. Taking on the form of a wolf, bear, or bird wasn't mythological. It was potentially attainable through hammer manipulation. Cosmic audits. Small mistakes in behavior, speech, or thought could disrupt the invisible balance and invite misfortune. All of this was perfectly logical to them, terrifying to enemies, and thoroughly confusing to modern historians. Why it matters. Reading about Viking magic makes us chuckle, but it's also a window into a survival strategy. Their world was unpredictable and dangerous. Storms, starvation, raiders, and disease were constants. Magic, ritual, and superstition were ways to impose order on chaos. The absurdity is part of the charm. From cursed sticks to hair-combing rituals, Vikings transformed daily life into a high-stakes metaphysical management game. Modern humans may laugh, but the Vikings survived, and sometimes thrived, because of it. Conclusion. Life, death, and cosmic chaos. So, what did all this accomplish? Vikings survived harsh conditions. They enforced social norms magically. They gained psychological comfort in a chaotic world. They had a daily excuse to be extra weird and slightly terrifying. And yes, some of it probably killed them in spectacular ways. Miscast spells, cursed battles, and angry spirits had very real consequences. But the combination of superstition, ritual, and practical magic made Viking life richly layered, deeply absurd, and endlessly fascinating. Ultimately, Viking magic wasn't just superstition. It was a fully immersive, all-encompassing worldview where reality itself was negotiable and dangerous if ignored. The lessons? Don't sneeze in the wrong place, don't misplace a knot, and maybe leave a little ale for the invisible landlords. If nothing else, it gives you a lot to think about next time you complain about Wi-Fi or your morning coffee not being strong enough. Vikings didn't just manage life, they managed the cosmos.